Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Tsai. Welcome to the George W. Bush Presidential Library for our Working Nation Town Hall, Keeping America's Promise, co-produced with Hiring America. We are focusing on a special group of workers, veterans. There are 250,000 men and women transitioning from the military to civilian life each year. This is a group ready to work, to fill the millions of jobs that American businesses say are going unfilled because they can't find qualified workers. But making the move from serving and working in the military to the civilian workforce, full of unique challenges, some of them tangible and some of them perceived. We're talking about this important topic here in Texas, which is home to 15 active duty military installations. Just in Texas, 20,000 service members each year leave the military, many of them hoping to transition to the civilian workforce. Our discussion will include a frank conversation about those challenges, but what we really want to focus on are the programs and the initiatives that are working. Our panel of experts include business leaders, national and local leaders, nonprofits, and importantly, veterans. But first, I'm honored to introduce a very special guest to help kick off this discussion, General George Casey, who spent more than 40 years serving in the U.S. Army, including assignments in Europe, the Balkans, and the Middle East. From 2007 to April of 2011, General Casey led the Army as its Chief of Staff. He continues to serve the country and its veterans as an advocate for wounded soldiers, military families, and survivors of the fallen. He's passionate about fighting the stigma associated with combat stress, especially in the workplace. General Casey, welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. General Casey, why don't you start by giving us some context on the issue?
Sure. I'll start by saying I'm an American veteran. Yeah. And as you said, I proudly served our country for 41 years. And I'm not done making a difference. And even though I'm speaking for myself today, I know those sentiments are held by the vast majority of our veterans that are out there. We still have an awful lot to give. Some context. It may not seem like it, but we've been at war for, this is our 17th year at war. And in that time, more than 2.5 million men and women have deployed to combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And sadly, 130,000 of them are unemployed today. Across our country, there are more than 20 million veterans. 300,000 of them, more than 300,000, are unemployed today. We can do better than that as a country. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I've seen since I've left the Army and highlight a few of what I think are the key initiatives that have helped veterans transition into productive members of our society. The first thing I'd say is I really started looking at veteran unemployment numbers with the year I left the Army. And at that time, 2011, 8.3% of veterans were unemployed. As bad as that was, for post-9/11 veterans, the number was over 12%. And that was, for me, that was the low point. Things have happened over time that have significantly improved that. Today, the unemployment rate for veterans is 3%. And the unemployment rate for those post-9/11 veterans is just over 4%. So we made some good progress. How do we do that? I'd say 4 key initiatives. First is the post-9/11 GI Bill, and it's fitting that we're here in the Bush Library, because when President Bush signed that in June of 2008, he said we're doing this because the men and women who will take advantage of this bill will lead our peaceful pursuit of economic leadership in the 21st century. And he was absolutely right. More than 1 million men and women have already taken advantage of the GI Bill, and they're already making an impact on our society. The second thing that happened is Congress got productively involved. And in 2011, they passed the Vow to Hire Heroes Act. that provided incentives to employers to hire veterans. But it also mandated that the Department of Defense, the Veterans Administration, and the Department of Labor get together and close some of the seams that existed between the departments to facilitate the veterans' transition. And as I thought about this, I realized that throughout my whole career, the Army didn't pay much attention to transition. It was a check-the-block program. But over time, people came to realize that if we accelerate and improve the transition, it accelerates the way veterans can integrate into society. So that was a huge program. And finally, in 2014, the Department of Defense came out with a directive that completely revamped the transition programs, and it's made a significant impact. The third major impact was from the private sector. And the private sector got involved in a big way, both in nonprofit organizations that supported the transition of veterans, but also the big companies. I don't know a major U.S. company that doesn't have a veterans hiring initiative. And so they played a huge role in driving these unemployment numbers down. And then lastly, the fourth big impact, I think, is people realize that the transition needed to be approached holistically, because it wasn't just about a job and a veteran. The vast majority of the veterans had families. So it was a job not only for the veteran, but potentially for his or her spouse. Spouse unemployment for active duty folks today is about 28%, significantly higher than veterans. They needed financial readiness training. They needed to understand all the benefits that were available to them. They needed to understand wellness. Lots of things there. And so lots of good programs have come up around that. So those four things have made a significant impact. We still have a long way to go because, as you said, about 250,000 people a year leave the armed forces. And you start with 300,000 already unemployed and 250,000 coming in again, and it keeps coming like that every year. Let me just close by just making a comment about veterans in general. Shortly after I left the active duty, I was reading a conference board report, and the conference board is a business intelligence firm up in New York. And they had gone out and they had polled a bunch of CEOs, and they said, "What qualities are you looking for in your workforce?" And the CEOs came back and said, "We want good work ethic. We want strong values. We want the ability to communicate. We want the ability to solve problems. And we want the ability to work as a member of a team." And as I read that, I said to myself, that sounds like the outfit I just left. But that's what these veterans bring to the table. And so when I talk to them, and I talk to lots of veterans groups around the country, the first thing I tell them is don't sell yourself short. You already have the hard skills, the skills that are hard to train. You've already got the skills that the business leaders are looking for. And I tell them the story about my going to graduate school after I'd been in the Army 9 years. And I started reading international relations theory, and I thought I was the dumbest guy on the block. But I persevered and got through it and came out fine. And I said, don't sell yourself short, work hard. The second thing I tell them is, don't be afraid to ask for help. And that might seem odd. But what I find is all these service members are trained to be members of a team. And when you're a member of a team, you don't ask for something for yourself. It's all about the team. And that's a big change for them. And so they need to get out and do it. And then lastly, I tell them to be bold, because the country needs their leadership. And I firmly believe that this generation, empowered by the GI Bill, can have every bit as significant an impact as the World War II generation benefited from the GI Bill. So there you go, Stephanie. That's a starter.
That's some really terrific context, and it does sound like, with your long lens of history in the armed services, it does sound like there have been a lot of improvements in the rate of veteran employment. But I want to touch on this issue that you bring up, which is, when you're in the military, you're in a team. You're also in a hierarchical structure. And I think one of the themes that's going to come up in our panels is this idea of how do you transition from being a service member where everybody wakes up at the same time, eats at the same time into a corporate culture, and I don't want to presume that all of American corporate culture is the same, but where individuality matters, where individual problem solving matters. How do you transition? And is that an issue that's come up for veterans that do have a hard time fitting in?
Yeah, I mean, I get the question all the time, and people seem to think that four-star generals just say, okay, today we're going to put our hats on this way, and everybody goes out and does it.
Right.
And I tell them that's not exactly how it works.
No?
We are, it is definitely, the military is definitely a hierarchical organization, but you still have to deal with people. And what the interesting thing is, what people don't see is when the men and women are deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, they are the most innovative and creative people you can imagine. I mean, their lives are on the line. And so they're looking for anything that can make a difference. It is a change, and a lot of it is personality driven. I mean, some people like the structure and the rigidity of hierarchical structures, and they don't adapt. But the vast majority of the people are very creative, and they have adapted, and they will adapt. Especially
for maybe the young enlisted men and women that joined before they went to college when they were 17, 18 years old. Do you have advice for what they should do when they're 6 months out, they've got 6 months left on their with their time in the service, and they're thinking about what to do next? Should they take some downtime? What should they do with that immediate time? Should they try to jump right into LinkedIn and find a job?
Yeah, interesting. I think the first thing I'd tell them is, if you don't have a degree, go to school.
Use the GI Bill.
Take advantage of the GI Bill and go to school. I mean, one of the really significant and I think not well-known impacts of the GI Bill is 62% of the men and women who have used it are first-generation college attendees and their families. First generation. I mean, that's a huge impact for our whole society. So I'd say get the education. And it may not be a college education. It may be learning a skill, and that's a choice they have to make. Do I want to go the college route, or do I want to learn a skill? And you're going to hear about some programs here that are actually in place to give transitioning servicemen and women a skill before they leave the military, so they at least have a job to start off with. I mean, I read someplace where over half of transitioning service members are unemployed in the first 18 months of their transition. That's not necessary. We can do better than that.
You talked about Iraq and Afghanistan and the 17 years that this country has been at war, and it occurred to me that a lot of the veterans that are returning really came back as heroes. They saw combat and they did things that might have earned them military honors, and then they have to come back potentially into a corporate culture that doesn't necessarily see that. They're just a cog in the machine. Is that hard for veterans to adjust to?
I'd say not so much. One is they're already a cog in the military. In the big military machine. They're a cog. But what I see is they don't want to be treated like heroes. They want to be, tell me what it is you want me to do, give me the training, and let me get on with it. The vast majority of folks, when you call them a hero, they cringe a little bit. I mean, I do. I'm not a hero, and most of the folks will tell you the same thing. They want to get on with it. They want to be part of the new team that they're on.
General Casey, thank you so much for kicking this event off with those terrific insights.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie.
As General...
Thanks, good.
As General Casey so passionately stated, there are a lot of challenges, but there are a lot of good people and companies working hard to help veterans. When we return, we'll continue to discuss the roadblocks, but we'll look at how businesses and organizations around the country are working towards solutions. Welcome back to Keeping America's Promise, our town hall on the work being done in Texas and nationwide to help our veterans move into civilian occupations. Before we meet our first panel, I'd like to let our audience here know that we will be taking your questions on the subject of veteran hiring after our discussion. So let's get our conversation going. And I want to introduce our panelists. Jeff Cleland is the manager of the Bush Presidential Center Military Service Initiative, which works closely with dozens of programs that focus on educating and training veterans to fill the jobs of the future. Jeff himself is a veteran and was retired from the Marine Corps due to injuries sustained in Iraq. John Corson is the president and CEO of the Home Builders Institute. HBI runs programs on 4 military bases, with more bases to come, to train transitioning vets in residential construction. 100% of those trained are placed in jobs with small independent construction companies. Also joining us is Jeff Hall, the National Employment Director for the Disabled American Veterans, with 1.3 million members. In addition to holding job fairs to bring vets together with companies looking for workers, DAV has created the Employer Guide to Hiring and Retaining Disabled Veterans. Jeff is a combat wounded veteran who served in the Persian Gulf War. And finally, I'd like to welcome to the stage Nicole Gardner, Vice President and founder of the Public Service Eminence Academy for IBM Global Business Solutions. She's also a senior advisor on the U.S. Federal Healthcare and Human Services team, working with the VA on the issue of transitioning from active duty to the civilian workforce. Welcome, and thank you all so much for this important discussion. And I want to start with the corporate bigwig amongst you, and that is you, Nicole. Tell us what IBM is doing to recruit and retain veterans, especially because the technology sector is so important.
So thanks, Stephanie. First of all, thank you to Working Nation and Hiring America for having us here. General Kelly gave us some great examples of why we are very excited to hire veterans. Earlier this year, our CEO, Ginny Rometty, made a commitment to President Trump that we were going to hire 2,000 more veterans to add to our workforce in the Americas, and we already have many thousands in our workforce today. Problem solving, teamwork, great leadership skills, these are all very highly valued skills in the workforce, and IBM's very, very interested in getting as many of those great people to come and work and add to our team. So we have a big veterans hiring initiative. There'll be a URL on the website of Working Nation after when this program airs. We encourage people to come and learn about what we're doing to hire more veterans. And we have a terrific training program that we offer as a free in-classroom training for certification on I2, which is an analyst program. It's a software tool that is very widely used across many industries. So we hire people who come out of that program, and we have given a leg up to veterans who get that certification and can take that as a credential. More than 500 people have gone through the program already.
All right. I want to bring Jeff Cleland into the conversation at this point because, Jeff, I know that you have really delved into the issue of training, and one of the statistics that has come up is that a lot of veterans don't want to do the job that they were doing when they were in the military. Now, if you were a computer expert in the military, I could see very easily how you might be eligible for one of the programs that Nicole talked about. But what about the other veterans that are trying to transition, and how do they approach a big company like IBM with their skill set?
Yeah, it depends on what survey you see. It's anywhere from 50 to 80% of veterans don't want to do what they did in the military. I was a machine gunner. I don't think there's many machine gun jobs in the civilian sector. But it is kind of this base level of skills that you bring with leadership, followership, ability to learn quickly. And then on top of that, you add on the degrees that veterans are getting. 52% of transitioning service members are entering into higher ed every year, so there's 1 million student veterans on campus, so they're coming to companies like IBM, not fresh out of the military. Some maybe are, who may be in the Signal Corps in the Army or in those computer fields, but they're coming with degrees, they're coming with experience outside of that. And then on top of that, there's training programs. Microsoft runs a great training program for certification. Syracuse University runs a great program like that. So they're coming to the table with certification, skills, and lived experience that maybe some of their civilian peers are not coming with.
One of the things that I wanted to lay out from the beginning after speaking to many of you is just the importance of work for a veteran. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, Jeff, the importance of veterans coming back from deployment and transitioning, and why work and what type of work is meaningful to them, and why it's so important.
Yeah, I think from a societal level, we pretty much know that if you have meaningful employment, you're less likely to use government services, you're less likely to commit crimes, you're less likely to use healthcare services. There's all these other implications that come to it. So it's important for these transitioning service members to find that right job, so that way they're living a meaningful life. They're gonna help our economy move forward. They're gonna grow families, and we know that larger families is tied to GDP growth. So there's also all these other implications. But finding that meaningful job is just important for all these other issues that maybe surround the transition itself.
Jeff Hall, with disabled veterans, can you speak to that as well, and maybe some of the unique challenges that one might face if they've been injured in the battlefield and come back now as a disabled veteran looking for work in the civilian marketplace?
Sure, thank you. I couldn't agree more with what Jeff had said. When I got out, I was thinking, actually, I was talking with Nicole beforehand. I didn't really care what I was doing when I got out. I just knew I needed to go to work. Because you need to keep the continuation of the getting up and going with purpose. And it didn't really register with me, because I wasn't in this career at that particular point. But 25 years later, of talking with veterans in various capacities, whether it's helping them through our service program with getting their benefits, whether it's disability benefits because they've been injured, or the many others. Now, with our newly implemented employment program, during the last 3 years, I've had the opportunity to have a lot of these conversations with veterans. And as you might suspect, there's just a wide range of answers to everyone that, no, I did that for 15 years in the military, I don't want to do that anymore, to somebody that is looking to actually continue that same type of program. But I know that when we've sponsored more than 300, or right around 300 career fairs across the country, 50 here in Texas. And out of those 50 that we've sponsored since 2014, just over 24,000 have attended our career fairs. That's right around 30,000 have attended, and almost half have actually been hired or been offered employment through those career fairs. So that's one method of many that can help. But one of the things that I would add to that is when we started doing these career fairs, we didn't really gauge how many people walking through the door would be somebody that was suffering from a service-related disability. And so that altered to what we were doing, DAV, when we're working with companies that are there helping them find that candidate. It transitioned us on the floor to be able to have these conversations of, are you getting your benefits? Because as much as employment and the continuation of that is important, so too are finding those resources and making sure they're getting their benefits, because it all goes
Absolutely.
hand in hand.
John Corson, I want to bring you into this conversation and Home Builders Institute, because when we talk about different ways that veterans can get trained, you actually go to the bases and train veterans before they're even veterans, when they're still active duty and they're on their way out. Talk about why that's important to start recruiting before they've actually left the service.
And let me take just half a step back, because the reason we have a very active and have for years trained veterans. And we did a survey about a year ago on veterans that we train. The demographic is typically early 30s, mid 30s. 29% of the veterans in that training program are in some state of homelessness or have been homeless.
Wow.
And 27% have some type of disability, primarily probably PTSD. So once the Department of Defense came out with the instruction allowing to put our program on the military installations, I sort of call it's our preventive maintenance program. And we're actually going physically on military installations. We are training military personnel who are going to transition out of the service within 180 days. The typical demographic in that program is soldiers, Marines, airmen, so on, that are probably served their first enlistment, maybe their second. They're in their mid-20s, 23, 24, 25, came into the service right out of high school. Many of them do not have a skill that's portable into the civilian industry. And There come a high number come from the artillery, infantry side, and frankly, to be all due respect to my corporate friends, they don't want to sit behind a desk. They want to do something that it keeps them working as a team, outdoors with their hands and so on. So we've put our program in these situations, and what we try to do is make sure than just train them, that we go through a step of connecting with them. We assess each one. What do you want to do when you leave in 2 months or 3 months? What do you really want to do long-term with your career? We train them with that curriculum. They get a certification. And every place we train, we have a job placement function. And right now, we're placing well over, in fact, most bases, 100% of those soldiers into jobs in the construction industry.
So one of the things that's come up among the issues is it's one thing to place. Retention is another issue. And I don't know if any of you on this panel want to start off this discussion about retention. Nicole?
So one of the things that's really important about retention is mentoring. And so we have a Veterans Advisory Board, which is an employee advocacy group. We help people who are coming in just as they transition in, and then help them to develop their careers. And I think just being able to understand from like a peer-to-peer perspective, kind of challenges you might be facing. So having a robust mentoring program is really important in helping people to see where their careers can go.
In our case, Stephanie, we follow them for a year, but more importantly, it's to make sure that they know what they're getting into with the job. Our job training is about 75% hands-on, so they know what it's like to go out and work on a construction site. They do that as part of their training. They know what it's like to be out working in a team with others. We want the last day of their training with us to be just like the first day of the job that they're placed in, so that there's no surprises, they understand what they want, and at the same time, they leave with a plan and a thought about what the career path is for them.
Jeff, I wonder if you have something to weigh in on something that John mentioned, which is there is a percentage of returning veterans that have suffered some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, combat stress. And obviously that's been really highlighted a lot in recent years in good ways, but I wonder if the amount of attention that's been paid to PTSD has had the knock-on effect of making employers bias against military hires.
Yeah, there is a stigma that comes with it, and we've done some work here at the Bush Center around that, and did a survey of about, I think it was 1,500 U.S. veterans and U.S. citizens and civilians, and then also in the UK and Canada as well on the stigmas and stereotypes around it. And by and large, the American population as well as Canadian UK population think that PTSD is a larger portion of that population. So if you kind of extrapolate that down to HR managers, you're going to assume that they think every veteran who comes in front of them is going to have some sort of issue, which is not the case. Your average service member, mostly, probably somewhere around 80% are getting out with no physical or mental issues coming into the workplace. And those who do have PTSD or post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, those symptoms can be manageable through treatment and through proper workforce rehabilitation type programs. So it has been kind of blown out of proportion, if you will. That might be a loaded term, but absolutely an issue.
Nicole, do you have a program at IBM to try to integrate veterans so they don't feel, regardless of whether they have PTSD, that they can fit into a technology company?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have a program that we've been working on with the VA on resiliency. And we can talk about it now. So we're really excited about what the VA has been doing to try and help people to get from transition and through and to thrive. And we have been collaborating with them on a digital tool that basically helps vets to understand what jobs are out there, because thriving starts with having the economic opportunity to support your family and to support yourself, and to have the self-esteem that knows that you're valued and that you're seen. So this particular application has Watson technology in it.
So it's a phone app.
It's a phone app, and it's embedded into a phone app. And the phone app basically has a context of trying to help people to understand what the components of transition and resiliency are. And it basically helps to figure out what jobs might be out there. The big vision is to offer help writing resumes, help doing an interview, help with the wardrobe of what you need to do to be prepared to present yourself for a job. But if you can show it, we'll take a look and see how it works. So basically it's a chat bot. And the chat bot, if you type into it, "I need a job," will actually start asking you some questions, and it qualifies and asks you what kind of job you'd like to have and where you'd like to apply, what geographic area, and what the required salary is. And this particular app right now is connected to USA Jobs, so it's a national job bank, but our vision is to include lots of different job opportunities from Indeed and Monster and all the big companies. And so it goes out and asks, so there it's asking, what's your salary range, what's your desired salary, and it's going to go out and grab all those jobs that fit that job description in the area that you want. In this particular case, it's New York, at the salary. And it goes, gets the jobs, and then you can go in and actually connect to them on USA Jobs. So there are all the jobs that are in that particular parameters, and it'll go get that job so you can find out where to send a resume, what you need to do in order to get the job. So we're hoping this is going to be really helpful and keep people, vibrant in the job market.
That's really neat. Just again, so many ways, whether we're talking about the job fairs or actually being on the installations or whether it's the online resources. Jeff Hall, you speak with a lot of potential employers at job fairs, and from these conversations, you've developed the DAV Employer Guide to Hiring and Retaining Disabled Veterans. What have you learned, and what do you recommend to the business community?
Well, it did derive, early on, we were focused more on the veteran walking through the door and really making every effort for them on that end of it. And it kind of eventually led us to those conversations more with the employers before the career fair and then post-career fair. And it just kept over and over again where employers were, obviously they're there at a career fair for veterans to hire veterans. So that was only the first part of the question. But most of them seem to, unless they were just simply a recruiter and they may not have the knowledge to ask this question, but most of them that would ask it were saying we need help in hiring disabled veterans, as an example. And we know it's a slippery slope. There's things you can ask, there's things you can't ask. And one thing kind of led to the other, to where we felt it best, being DAV and who we are, that we put together, working with some companies and doing our research and everything, to have a guide that would be available free of charge for companies that just simply visit our website at jobs.dav.org. They simply go there, and it wouldn't be something overly dense. It would be more on the top of the end of it that's going to answer most of those basic questions that we were getting at these career fairs. What do I do in this situation? One of the common ones that kind of come up, and I think we've touched on it here, was when in the subject matter of post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, we'd like to hire veterans, but when we look on their resume and that we see that they've been in combat, what should we be looking for? And it's really an off-putting question by nature of what it is. And there's really no easy way to answer it, probably no diplomatic way to answer it. So I can't share exactly the way I did answer it, but I would say it's a big no-no. You don't want to do that, because if you're screening veterans for PTSD, that boat is full. It's not an uncommon disability that's out there, number one. And number two, it's not something employers should shy away from. In fact, what they should, in my opinion, focus on is the fact that if they've been in a situation like that, this is another skill set that a veteran brings to the table, with the many we've talked about today, is the fact that they have the inherent ability to work under extreme pressure and in a diverse and most likely global situation, which any company, an IBM or anybody, could benefit from. And so we try to reverse that thinking when we talk with them. And hopefully our guide is going to help a lot of these companies answer those basic questions.
And I'd like to follow on to that. We have the advantage, Stephanie, of we watch them work. So we see them after they've come back from their last of maybe 2 or 3 deployments. So we get an opportunity to assess them when they come in, but we watch them physically out on job sites. We see them every day from 8 until 5. So before we place them in a job, we get a chance to really understand there's an opportunity for success or failure, and some may stay longer because of that. Some may, frankly, not be suitable, but we get the opportunity not to put them in a bad situation because we get the chance to watch them over several weeks, over a number of weeks and months, to watch them perform before we place them on the job.
And not only that, you give them a chance to do something that may actually address the stress, which is what this whole thing is about, which is what Working Nation and Hiring America is about, is the need that Americans have to work in meaningful, well-paying jobs. And in a way, if a veteran comes back with that type of stress disorder, you're actually giving them a chance to heal.
I think in our case, the key is not only watching them work and knowing what they're going to do, but show them what they can do. Give them that future, show them that career path as to where they can head. It's really interesting. I would say probably well over 50% of the military personnel we train, when you ask them, yes, I want to get a job, I want to move up, I really want to own my own business. They want to be entrepreneurs.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about entrepreneurship and how we encourage that. And Jeff Cleveland, maybe you have an insight into, I mean, of course, there's job training if you know you want to do building work or if you know you want to go into computers. But what is available to those that might want to start their own business?
Yeah, so I used to work at Syracuse University at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, and they started an entrepreneurship bootcamp for disabled veterans, which also spun off into entrepreneurship training for female veterans. And so there's programs out there. I believe now they've partnered with almost 10 campuses around the country, so you can not only receive this training, because nobody wants to go to Syracuse, New York in February, but you know, in other parts of the country, maybe warmer parts, but other great universities that have this this knowledge of teaching entrepreneurship. And then out there's also funding too. You know, for small businesses right now, it's hard to find funding through banks, through restrictions, through Dodd-Frank and other things like that. You have to have you know, so many years in. But there's angel investors out there that are willing to fund veterans and their startups, and there's also studies out there done by Syracuse and others that veterans are more likely to start businesses, they're more likely to stay in business longer, and they're more likely to hire other veterans within their company. So entrepreneurship is kind of in the fabric of what we are, not only as a nation, but as veterans.
I'd just add that DAV is partnered also with the Institute of Veterans and Military Families. The Entrepreneurship Bootcamp for Veterans with Disabilities is a very important program to us. In fact, we contribute to an award for top venture impacting veterans, because they do competitions and things like that really, when I went to the first NatCon, National Conference for the EBV program, I was blown away at the end. I was just inspired greatly by the ingenuity and the innovation that was in that room. And these are all men and women and all of all ages and walks of life that just want to own their own business, because they're not the cookie cutter mold of going to college or getting out and going to job back home or whatever the case may be, that they envision themselves owning their own business. And the EBV program is a fantastic program for that.
We've actually hosted one of the national conferences right in this room, actually, with Entrepreneurship Bootcamp for veterans with disabilities. And I think it goes to that, that's part of the American dream. You can use the military as a social mobilizer, and then when you get out of the military, you can start your own business, and that's a social mobilizer, that's an economic mobilizer, and that's a huge part of it.
You know, another thing to kind of go along with this is, you know, we've talked a little bit about GI Bill and how that works and why that's so important, and the same thing holds true with VA vocational rehabilitation for those disabled veterans that qualify for that. So either or, but again, not everybody wants to go to college, we get that. But they're also 23, 24, 28, whatever the age range that they are, they don't want to go now. But when they're my age and they're trying to compete with younger people on that job, what do they do? What are their means? Well, they can come to us and we can kind of help them with different educational programs. But if it's a younger person, a post 9/11 veteran, that to me is why the Forever GI Bill passage was so important. Not just the fact that, oh, great, I don't have an expiration date and I can use it whenever. Because if you give them an illustration of, when you're my age, you now can use that benefit. I can't use mine. Mine's done. Mine expired. Yours can go forever. So now you can get those additional classes, because 15 years ago when you didn't want to go to college, now you can.
Although, you know, I will say, bringing John Corson back into this conversation, you know, there are a lot of college graduates that are also struggling to find work, which is why I think John's work is so relevant at the Home Builders Institute. We need plumbers, we need stonemasons. The construction industry continues to boom. However, I think of building work as being contract-based, and I wonder if you can gauge the success of the stability of these jobs for veterans.
Sure, and let me mention, it's not mutually exclusive. The students that leave are in our military students in our program. First of all, they pay nothing for it, and they use none of their GI Bill, none of their post-living GI. So they leave with the full educational benefit available to them. And as we watch them and trace them, yeah, they're working as plumbers or carpenters or so on, but they're also going to community college or taking classes at four-year schools, and they'll end up with a degree ultimately if that's what they choose to do, but they have those benefits available. Right. And I think that the key is in terms of sustainability, what we see is when they're out there and making decisions for their life, they've got a lot of different, there's like 100 different ways they can go in that industry, should they choose to go. So they've got a lot of choices in front of them. And I think it's just a matter of, we train a population that needs a start. They came out of high school, they've been, as we talked earlier, they've been told what to do, when to get up, when to go to bed, what to eat, and so on. And so they need a leg up to get started. And then from there, we give them that foundation to then make a decision as to which direction they want to go in those tools. Right.
Nicole, IBM has the opportunity to really hire a lot of veterans, and I wonder what veterans add to the business model at IBM, because we're not just talking, I don't think veterans want charity. I don't think they want a company that says, I'm gonna give you a job because you're a veteran, you're a disabled veteran. But from what I understand from the veterans that are on this panel, they're potentially a boon to business.
Absolutely. So again, General Casey listed some of the great skills that veterans bring, and there's a great video of IBMers who are veterans who talk about how the translation from military service and feeling a part of a mission and a family and having a higher purpose really correlates to their experience at IBM. IBM has a big mission and it's a part of a family. There's a woman in that video that talks about being in the Coast Guard, and the mantra of the Coast Guard is ready for anything, ready for a challenge. And at IBM, we have the same feeling. So I think that veterans offer us great problem-solving skills. They're great at teamwork. They're great leaders. They're ready and willing to learn, and they're always up for a challenge. And those are things we really value at IBM, not just from the veterans, but from everyone, and we can learn from them.
So with that, we are going to take questions from the audience in just a moment. But before we take those questions from the audience, Working Nation asked vets via social media to tell us, what is the hardest thing you face when looking for work? And a lot of the answers reflect what we've been talking about here today. Travis Rice writes, a lot of people sell themselves short. They can't figure out how to translate their military experience into skills that civilian employers can understand. This is huge for those who served in combat arms and think their resumes consist of various janitorial skills, but completely overlook their leadership experience. And Jean Conchise says, most veterans suffer from anxiety and depression. We are not medicated to the point of giving up. I too am a veteran, so I can relate. There is a high degree of suicide among our group. You are taught to kill, but when you return to society, you are told to adjust. Okay, do we have any audience questions?
Yeah, Jim Reed, I'm an Army Airborne veteran, and I run a small nonprofit that trains veterans who want to be entrepreneurs. In the last 7 years, we have trained 3,150 veterans in 15 Texas cities on entrepreneurship, including spousal. And yeah, it's been great fun. We've raised $1.3 million to do it, and most of our stuff is free. But I have a couple of questions in terms of entrepreneurship, and in particular the area that you're focused on. We have 35,000 veterans returning to Texas each year, and over 25% of them come back to the DFW area, and 25% of those are interested in entrepreneurship. We got 3,500 unemployed veterans here. We got 54,000 spouses working for work. We got 128,000 post 9/11 veterans in Texas. The military.com has a higher unemployment rate than the average population, mainly coming from OIF and OEF. Anyway, my question is, one of the things I've noticed, there's such a lack of attention towards getting the word to veterans about where they can go to get help, okay? I have a constant contact database of 4,000 veterans and patriots, and try and communicate through that and through networking and so forth. But my question is, how can we better get the word out? Because there are tons of programs in Texas for veterans, and Texas is blessed. We have more programs for veterans than any other state in America. And that ain't Texas bragging, that's Texas truth.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, I'd love to take that. That is a problem, and I think sometimes we look at the veteran population as just saying, you're a veteran because you served, but there's different personas of veterans. So you have homeless veterans, you have young veterans, you have old veterans, and all these programs are specific. There's criteria, eligibility criteria for serving them. So we're almost trying to talk to this entire population, and it's confusing instead of talking to the individual personas of a veteran, if that makes any sense. So as far as like the entrepreneurship crowd, they're reaching out, but they might actually be reaching out to the wrong population of veterans who aren't interested in that. And same thing as, there's some truck driving schools or some things like that, and they might actually be reaching out to the college population, and that's the wrong population. So it's almost like a marketing problem that we're having. Here at the Bush Center, we've partnered with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to create the Veteran Employment Transition Roadmap, which is a roadmap. If you're getting out of the military, you can kind of go through the process of it, and along the way, it'll plug in resources. So trying to tackle that problem, that's more of a national effort, but would be interested to hear if there's anything kind of Texas-based going on with a similar digital application.
Yeah, we may hear about that in the next panel in more detail. I think that one of the issues he brings up is, if you're a veteran and you're coming out, do you Google like jobs and veterans, or does the military? And Jeff Hall, maybe you have the answer to this question. Does the military prepare you with like, here are the go-to repositories for information on skills and training? And of course, it does depend. It does depend, are you an enlisted service member who plans to go into construction, or are you somebody who's looking to be recruited by a major corporation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, with DAV, let me just address it like this. We have transition service officers on, 32 of them are across the country that cover about 100 military bases. And so they're involved with veterans or active duty service members before they even get out, and for a host of reasons. They help them with to understand their benefits, they do briefings just like the military does. I don't want to get pitted to say that the military is not doing a good job, but the military is not doing a good job.
Right. And that's why places like the Bush Center are important, because maybe this is a place, Jeff Cleveland, where they can come and they can understand, like, here's what's available to you. They're great at benefits.
Well, DAV as well. I mean, the advocacy arm of the DAV in DC is doing some great work as well, but trying to change this transition process. When I got out in 2008, I was a corporal and I was being medically retired, and I sat next to a colonel who was retiring, and we were going through the same class, and I wanted to go to school, and he was retiring, and I'm like, why are we in the same class? Like, we haven't really figured that out. Things have changed a little bit since 2008 and have gotten a little bit better, but there is an entrepreneurship training if you're thinking of that, but I think we need to even separate it more and the transition process to those going to school, those who want to get into manufacturing, home building, things like that, and really separate this population to give more specific training instead of this broad check the box type, here's your benefits and that. And I think that, through some advocacy for us, DAV, some of the other big six organizations, some of the legacy organizations, this is a policy issue that we really need to wrap our hands around to fix.
I had testified once before it was the House Veterans Affairs Committee on this very issue on transition. And all 5 military branches were present, and they were in the panel before us, and they talked about who was doing what and what was being done right, and so on and so forth. And when I was asked the question, I answered it simply, Listen, before I went in the military, I had no military experience other than what TV or books offered. So you guys had to take me in, and you made me look like everybody else, and we got the same clothes, and then you marched me, you did all this, and about 8 weeks later, I was some sort of a soldier, right? So it takes about 8 weeks. Then another 5 or 6 weeks in infantry training and so on and so forth. So at least it took about 15 weeks for me to be a soldier that I could go to a unit, which was here at Fort Hood, Texas. So why on earth would you give me a week of classes to teach me to be a civilian? Only a week. And out of that week, how many of those days or hours are spent of me being pushed and shoved into 2 different directions, so I can't make it to this briefing, I just got to go in and sign off or get signed off, and that's part of the problem. And really it kind of came down to, well, it was money. And there's no reason whatsoever that that's acceptable, that it's money. These are our men and women who are going to be our future, our leaders and things like that. And if they're already serving our nation in the military, then we at the very least, need to treat them right through the transition process.
John Corson, thank you so much. That's an important point, and I'm glad we were able to make it on this panel. Yes, please.
My name is Bob Cartwright, and I'm here representing the Texas Association of Business. As well, I've been very active with Texas SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management, for a number of years. Back about 7 years ago, we started a program called the Patriotic Promise, which was educating employers about how to deal and transition with veterans and bring them into the workplace and the value of a veteran into the workplace. I think as time has gone on, we've done a very good job of hiring veterans, but I think some of the things that you brought up in terms of retention and cultural change is very important. And then the other piece of the puzzle is John, I applaud you what you're doing. We've kind of been working on a new program called Operation Direct Connect, which is basically exactly what you're doing on military bases, and that is bringing employers to the veterans, giving them the opportunity through assessment programs and so on to see if they would be a good job fit for those employers. And then from there, actually transitioning to the employer out of the military, so at the end of the day, they do have a job and they're off and running into their civilian career. Yeah. The other is the fact that I applaud IBM and all the major corporations across the country. I also participate with the Society for Human Resource Management at the national level in terms of volunteer leader. And with that in mind, one of the things we're missing today is that all the major employers have the resources to execute those strategies in terms of inclusion, diversity, those kind of things. But the medium, the middle, and the small employer who want to hire veterans do not have the resources, and they don't have a clue in terms of pulling that together. So one of the things we're working on in Texas today is a roadmap and a toolkit to work with medium and small employers in terms of how to go about doing that, taking the knowledge base and so on from the larger employers, U.S. Chamber of Commerce and so on. But the key on that is, and my question is, how prepared can we be in terms of pulling folks together from a collaborative effort? The gentleman that came up here earlier said we've got a ton of resources in Texas working from a nonprofit, for-profit, and so on in terms of executing the strategy, but we never pull everybody together in a collaborative partnership so that at the end of the day we have a database available for the veteran, for the family. And one of the things I'd love to talk with you after the program is about IBM participating in a program we're looking at in terms of creating a veteran database space that would be on a volunteer basis, but a secure database, so everybody can go to the same place to get the information from all the things you're talking about at their leisure, but also secure, because I know the military is concerned about having a database out there where they can go find all the veterans in the country. So those are the kind of things. But my question is this: what is it going to take to get beyond what we're talking about today and look at the new battle plan tomorrow in terms of our country, how we integrate veterans and how we work together, not only from the transition side, but also from the civilian side of bringing us closer together so that we have a cultural shift and be able to do the things we need to do much more seamlessly?
Thank you.
I can touch a little bit on the retention piece, which is an interesting kind of double-edged sword that I don't think everyone really looks at. Is if you compare the transitioning population to the millennial population, we actually stay in jobs probably longer than the millennial population, and I think we forget that transitioning service members maybe don't want to admit it, but we are millennials. The younger population is for sure. As far as kind of moving these initiatives forward, it is a tough It is a tough idea when you talk about especially the small and mid-sized businesses who maybe hire one person a year or two people a year, because you can create this initiative and you can get them on board, and then they hire that person and then they go away. So it's hard to get. There's got to be hundreds of thousands of businesses in Texas that want to hire veterans. It'd be hard to get them all in a room, and then they would kind of go away. So it is tough, but I think that what you're saying and kind of that technology platform makes it easier. So you don't actually have to get everyone together. You can post those jobs. It's getting it in front of the veteran population. But I think that's where peer-to-peer networks can come in. Student Veterans of America, Team Rubicon, Team Red, White, and Blue, partnering with organizations like that, is DAV, VFWs as well, to be able to push that in front of the veteran populations. And then social media marketing. The younger population of transitioning service members and veterans are hanging out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Social media marketing, you can have a huge impact with a small amount of dollars. You'd be surprised.
Those are good solutions. I'm glad you're highlighting them. Coming up next, we look at how Texas is leading the way in helping address this issue. Welcome back to the Working Nation Hiring America Town Hall, Keeping America's Promise. Texas has a huge veteran population. By one count, as many as 40,000 vets have settled in the state and are looking for work. Let's talk about how the state and local businesses are tackling the issue. And again, a reminder to our audience here at the Bush Institute that we will be taking your questions at the end of this panel. So joining us now are Ruth Hughes, Commissioner representing employers for the Texas Workforce Commission. She works directly with Governor Abbott to find and close gaps in the hiring process. Of great pride is the Commission's program, Texas Operation Welcome Home, which works with transitioning service members looking for work. Andrew Morton is the Executive Director for the Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM. In his role, he works to make certain that hiring managers develop a better understanding of what a vet can bring to their business. Mr. Morton spent 21 years in the Army, including deployments overseas. Jason Oliver is the VP of Talent Acquisition for AT&T, a founding member company of Veterans Jobs Mission. AT&T has 14,000 employees who are vets and vows to hire 20,000 more by 2020. Maria Terry, spokesperson for the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. IAVA has 400,000 members worldwide. It led the advocacy for the Vow to Hire Heroes Act of 2011 and has been turning its attention to the special needs of female veterans. Ms. Terry herself is a U.S. Army vet who served in active duty and the reserves and was deployed to Iraq. And finally, Larry Hughes, Vice President of Franchising Systems for 7-Eleven. He is a West Point graduate. You can tell by his posture. He served in the Army, and he went on to get a doctorate in education. He is involved with several initiatives to recruit veterans on both the corporate and franchise level. Thank you so much for joining us, all of you. I'd like to start this panel with you, Commissioner Hughes, and all the great things Texas is doing for veterans. Talk about Operation Welcome Home.
Great. Well, first, thank you for having me here, and thank you to the panelists who have served our country and to many of your viewers in the audience. We really, in Texas, value our veterans. We have 1.6 million veterans here in Texas, and when I started in this role a couple of years ago, one of the first conversations that Governor Abbott and I had was that he directed us to look at what are the gaps in services to veterans. And we've heard about so many wonderful services that I really thought initially we'd have more of an outreach role or highlight a lot of the outreach of the great work that's already being done. But what we found in discussions across the state with stakeholders and talking to different veterans groups across the state is that there was a need to have a little bit more emphasis on finding those veterans while they are still active members and reaching out before they're veterans so that we can make sure they start to know about the services available and transition and have an easier time transitioning out. If you've served in our military, we want to make sure that when you're out back in the civilian world, you serve with that same pride and purpose that you had while serving. And so for that reason, we went down this road of creating Texas Operation Welcome Home. And it's an example of the wonderful partnerships across the state because we did this with the Texas Veterans Commission, the Workforce Commission, the Governor's Office, our 28 local workforce solutions partners across the state, and then working with their contacts in the different military installations. So it has several components. One of them is that we created the ability to provide funding for training for skills for veterans. So there's a component that has funding for training and identifying what type of training an active member or recent veteran may be interested in. And it's reaching out at 180 days before separation, but the funding is also available 180 days post, so that if you start a program, you can see that through. So there's that part of it. There's the alliance, which is incredibly important, because rather than having one meeting where we get together and discuss best practices and issues across the state, we meet quarterly across the state. We've had meetings at JBS Day.
Who's in the alliance? Employers?
Right, so the alliance is made up of our state agency partners, our workforce solutions partners, our military installation groups, and then we have the ex officio members of the many wonderful associations that serve employers, as well as employers that come and attend our meetings as well. But the main focus of it is to make sure that we have that communication across the state.
Yeah.
And so we've just picked up a lot of wonderful examples. Our last meeting was at Fort Bliss, where they've done such a great job of having an American Job Center in the installation. And they were really, I think, the first in the country to do that, so that all of the services are available right there on site. So it's a wonderful integration. It's a great success model, and Fort Hood and so many others have wonderful examples.
Model is a great term for it, and the reason this is such a great place to do this forum is because Texas is on the forefront of so much of how to hire veterans. I want to bring in some of our corporate interests here, and Jason with AT&T, I want to start with you. Why has your company made it such a priority to recruit veterans, and how is that benefiting AT&T?
Well, I think it's fair to say it's centered in the very fabric of what actually AT&T, when you look at our whole history, is about. I mean, if you go back to the 1960s, you go back to even 1945, I mean, we have had a large contingent workforce of veterans. And those who have served, active members, as well as the families. And so part of the benefit we've had from an AT&T perspective is that rich history. And that rich history from a brand, more importantly, and that rich history from a connection to the community that we're talking about today. So when you pivot forward and you say, okay, well, why is that so important? I can talk to you about why that's important from a skill set and leadership perspective in our business, from a technical skill perspective in AT&T, but that relationship is so important because it starts with our leaders, our CEO and chairman, and historically our chairmen and CEOs, and it's just ingrained in the very fabric not only of technology, but in terms of the innovation that's obviously happened in the military and the technology used, and so again, it's just part of who we are.
Yeah, and Larry, from my understanding of 7-Eleven, there are also several former military officers that serve in the senior leadership, including yourself, at the leadership there. Is it like being in the military, being at 7-Eleven?
Well, our CEO is a former Army officer, and several members of our executive team have military service. I would tell you that what we have discovered is that the veterans that have come on board and joined our team have just had extraordinary success. And for many of the reasons General Casey laid out earlier, we also think there's a process orientation, a systems orientation that they bring with them that really serves them well in our organization, and accountability and a proactive approach that we also think really accelerates their ability to be successful. What's unique about us, though, I will tell you, is that because we franchise stores, we actually have opportunities for veterans to join our corporate team or to actually become franchisees. And we've got programs on both sides that address those opportunities.
All right, I want to bring our two other veterans on the panel into this conversation. And Maria, I'll start with you. You were leaving the military and trying to get into the HR field. What was your personal experience, and can you share what you learned from it and what other veterans can learn from it?
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. I experienced a little bit of a roadblock trying to communicate to employers that I had the experience to do the job in HR. My previous service in the military, I took care of soldiers. I took care of their pay. I made sure they were paid timely. I processed reports for units.
You mean you did HR?
Yes. I did do HR.
Why didn't that translate when you were applying for jobs?
It didn't translate because I didn't have the experience in the industry. So someone would look at me and say, well, you know, all you have is experience in the military, you have no experience in the industry with an insurance firm or with a technology firm. So that was the roadblock that I experienced. And even though I served 4 years in active duty, at the time when I was looking for employment, I was a U.S. reservist. I started at a job in HR with 0 experience in their books, although I had over 4 years of experience in the U.S. Army.
Andrew, you're in human resources as well. Why is that a problem? Why can't employers see? Maria did human relations in the military. I could bring her here. She could fit in.
Well, I will tell you, I think it's an evolving process. You know, for the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, which I know Maria is a part of, and I know many of the Texas HR representatives are a part of too. I think it's been a kind of a maturation and an appreciation of those soft skills, and leaders, whether they're non-commissioned officers in the Air Force or officers in the Army or what have you, those leadership skills are the same applied skills that HR managers do every day in companies big and small, taking care of people. You know, HR, I don't want to get too far down the road in the HR history, but they had a history of being the compliance police, but where they really are is they're what I call compassionately compliant. And that's what we are as leaders too. We understand the rules and policies, but we also understand the human element of human resources. When I get back to another point that one of the panelists talked about, you know, the biggest challenge really that I think we all face as veterans and employers is going from veteran-friendly to veteran-ready. And veteran-friendly is a 15% discount. It's altruistic, and it's a part of that sea of goodwill that Admiral Mullen talked about. And it's hugely important to what it is that America has done to embrace veterans. But being veteran-ready is really bridging the divide between the we-will world of the military to the at-will world and reality of the private sector. And there's phases to it, and there's inherent challenges, not just in the skill sets, but in communicating and debunking myths and stereotypes and perceptions. And by the way, that's not, veteran ready doesn't mean the employer. There's also the veteran in that too. Veteran's not in the middle of the triangle. The veteran is a part of the triangle of all these great organizations, many of the organizations here on the stage, the employer and the veteran. No one's in the middle. The veteran has a big role and responsibility. The veteran has to be able to actualize and articulate. And that means they need to figure out not only what they're capable of doing, but what they're willing to do. And then the employer needs to appreciate and accommodate. And appreciate doesn't necessarily mean thank you for your service. It means an understanding of the skill sets that the veteran brings to the table.
Yeah, it's a great point. Larry, I wonder if when you got out of the military, if it was a clear path to you how to find yourself in corporate culture and exist there in a way that would lead to success, and whether there was a cultural change you had to process.
Yeah, well, one of the things that when I transitioned, I can recall the perception being that military leadership is about this reliance on the uniform code of military justice, and I issue orders, you follow orders, and what I quickly found was that the same thing that makes leaders successful in corporate America makes leaders successful in the military. It's the same formula. So as I began to better understand that, I became more comfortable with my transition. And I would tell you, as we have engaged transitioning veterans, both on the corporate side and through franchising, one of the things that we have found is that there is sometimes this lack of confidence They don't fully appreciate everything that they bring to the table. They're making our company better. They're adding value to our company. It's not about us, we're not trying to do a favor.
Right.
We're actually a better company because of their presence.
It kind of reflects what Jason was saying.
Yeah, I'd add to it in terms of, when we talk about this as AT&T, creating an inclusive environment,
right,
is the key to AT&T success, everyone's success here on this panel. And so one of the things that we did early on within talent acquisition, and part of this gap is just understanding. From tolerance, if you will, to understanding. Just understanding of what the experience are, understanding of what individuals are going through. And so how we tackled that from a talent acquisition perspective was, listen, we have a leader who most people know probably in this room, Johanna Martinez. She is a veteran Marine. She runs our talent acquisition, veteran attraction, I'm not going to call it initiative, our culture. And how better to have a veteran in talent acquisition and recruitment educating my other team members on the questions to ask, things to be sensitive to, things to understand. And so we've taken that initiative and other things and pivoted that into making sure that we are finding veterans and active military and their family, find them where they are. And one of the ways we've done that from a technology perspective is open up a social forum where you may not be an employee of AT&T, that's fine. You may be interested in AT&T, so you can get on these virtual social sessions and interact with our talent acquisition folks, interact with our leaders, and just get to know what AT&T is about and talk to you about your resume, your skills, your interview, much broader than just our world, if you will, of AT&T.
I want to get into more of what you need to get hired at one of your corporations. But I also want to get to the issue of female veterans and whether they have unique challenges. I think what's interesting, and when I was talking to Andrew earlier, is that veterans are considered like an affinity group, like the way a minority group or women might be considered, or any other group. And if you're a female veteran, you're battling sort of things on two fronts and maybe perceptions and stigmas. Can you talk about those unique challenges and how you address them with veterans?
Well, at IAVA, we focus on three things. We want to connect veterans to resources, to other veterans. We want to unite them. We create an environment. We create opportunities for veterans to get together, and we empower. But we also reach out to our member population to really find out what are the pressing issues that they are experiencing, during these times. And from our most recent survey, we discovered that women veterans are experiencing a higher unemployment rate compared to their peers, to their counterparts, the males. And so they're struggling to get a job. They're experiencing higher homelessness in comparison to their male counterparts. And it's very hard to believe because our survey also shows that women veterans are high achievers. They're going back to school. They're getting higher education. They're really trying to put themselves out there on the market. But our job at IAVA at the moment is to really drive that discussion and bring it to the forefront. How do we make an environment that meets the needs of women veterans? Take the VA. It's not inclusive if you really look at it. You walk into a VA and it says, he who borne the battle. Well, she borne the battle as well.
She did.
She really did. So, those are the kind of things we really need to focus on, and we're trying to drive that conversation all the way to DC to make our senators, our House representatives aware that we need to make a change. We're not asking for special treatment. we're asking for adequate treatment, appropriate treatment for women veterans.
Well, that is a conversation that women that aren't veterans are obviously having as well. I want to bring Ruth back into the conversation when we talk about retention, because it's all well and good to give a job to a veteran. It's another thing to set them up for success, either for their next job or with upward mobility within the company. What are success stories that you've heard, ways that companies can retain these veterans and really bring them to the next level of their professional lives?
Well, I absolutely agree with the first panel when you had Nicole sharing that mentorship is such an important part. And I think that companies are aware of that and are really looking at that training component and trying to put that investment in making sure that they not only hire, but they retain and that they maintain that company value that they have put out there. We started in Texas a We Hire Vets program so that employers who have hired, who have 10% of their workforce as Texas veterans, get a recognition, and we thank them and with a We Hire Vets decal. And while it's symbolic, it's been very effective and well received. Yeah. And part of that 10% margin is to really have that retention piece so that it isn't just that you've hired a veteran and so you're being recognized, but you have actually committed to that retention. It's a program we just rolled out this summer, but it's already been well received, and we're hoping will just be more towards the effort of retaining. I also heard the panelists talking about how you transition your skills and your experience that Maria was saying. One thing Texas has is the texas2skills.com, where you can go online, put in your MOS, your military occupation, and it will translate what those skills are so that you can be a better advocate for yourself, or HR professionals can better understand what you did.
And can veterans around the country use that?
This is something that's available online, absolutely. And there are many resources such as that. We also in Texas have College Credit for Heroes, where we translate skills so that you can get, most of our programs, you get an average of 25 credit hours. In our community college partners, we have 47 across the state. And so that you don't take 101 when you've been a medic for 4 or 5 years.
You all have so many resources for veterans here. I wonder if the panelists have opinions on why more of these programs aren't nationwide and available to everyone. And Andrew, I know you probably have some thoughts on retention and what works and doesn't there as well.
Sure, and you know, in some cases it's a byproduct of the number of veterans within the particular state. I mean, Texas is an amazingly wonderful state, accommodating veterans across the board, one of the top 3. California, Texas, and Florida, I believe, are the top 3. Relative to retention, you know, it's not unlike relationships in general. Most of the problems with fit happen long before the relationship ever evolves in the first place. And it's about understanding each other in that match. And if it's just focused on a program for altruistic purposes, or it's a veteran-friendly hiring program, you're going to have a bad fit, whether it's on the part of the veteran or whether it's on the part of the organization. So what we at SHRM are really focused on, our SHRM Foundation in particular, it's our altruistic and thought leader portion of our organization that's really trying to give our HR managers real resources and educational programs. We're really focused on the retention issue with a number of partners right now and looking at the longer-term, longitudinal things that occur with veterans, 2-3 years. The typical 2-year attrition rate across the board is about 35% in organizations. Veterans are about 65%.
Wow.
And that's with first jobs in particular. So, I mean, I personally experienced it. I know maybe members of the panel may have experienced it too. You're in that hyper speed, I gotta find a job and I'm gonna take the first job I'm offered because that's the thing that you do when you're in the military. And the challenge is that you're gonna make that square peg fit no matter what, and you do it for as long as you can. And the organization's in a bind because they don't wanna fire a veteran. So you're both in this position of not a good fit. And what we really want to do is we want to get more people into a position of good fit. We want this maturation of understanding to really focus on the search and discovery phase so that thrive can really happen because it's a byproduct of a good fit.
That is terrific. We're going to open things up to questions from the audience. So again, if you have a question, please approach one of the microphones. But first, I want to look at some of the other answers that Working Nation got when we asked vets via social media to tell us what's the hardest thing you face when looking for work. And a lot of the answers reflect what we've been just talking about. Steve Campbell writes, depends on the jobs. Government services offer a boost to vets. Lots of places respect the ability required to be a success in the military. As a Vietnam veteran, I used these aids, plus we had the GI Bill for education and loans. Mike Henry tells us, when I came home from Vietnam, every job application asked your draft status, and if you were a veteran, you were immediately not considered. Let's take your questions, sir, please.
Hello, I'm Dave Gregorio. I lead an initiative called Heroes to Healthcare. It's primarily focused on the 11,000 enlisted veterans that we have coming out annually that are having a heck of a time transitioning into the healthcare industry. We have phenomenal programs on the veteran side. They're growing, they're developing, they're doing terrific. Our greatest challenge is getting the employers to understand the value, not just of the MOS, but the broad range that they bring. And that's where we've poured our effort into, and that's what's delivered the greatest success. We have about 500 folks that we've transitioned at this point, and it's the employers that need the greatest help. The veterans, especially my Marines, they're Gumby flexible, they're incredible.
Andrew.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's really what Sherman's focused on because, you know, with 300,000 members across the country, they're really on the front lines of this hiring process, and that part of education, both the tangible skills. Now, to your point in healthcare, we also have to create programs where credentials are recognized, that a 91 whiskey in the military, which is a combat medic, is recognized as an EMT without having to put a lot of investment into that civilian training. So credentialing programs are extremely important for those who do want to do the thing that they were trained to do in uniform in this private sector. But I could not agree with you more, sir.
Andrew, we created the credentialing program to transition those skills. Look forward to talking to you.
Smart people like you are always way ahead of me.
Yeah, and those are important policy questions to raise during this panel.
I have a question about a word that hasn't been mentioned yet in an hour and a half, and that's the word spouse. Syracuse has got it right. They had the person at Syracuse who created the VET program. I went to the Oklahoma State program. It's a great program. He moved over to create the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, underscore families. So spouses need attention too. Most of the households in America are two-income households.
Right.
Linda McMahon of SBA just noted, and I'll give you some data, we have 320,000 veterans in the DFW area. 3/4 of them are married. That translates into 280,000 spouses. 23% of those spouses are unemployed. That's higher than OEF and OIF. That translates into 64,000 spouses. 54,000 of them are looking for work, 85%.
Yeah.
That's a big number. That's, somebody mentioned 40,000 veterans in Texas. We got 54,000 spouses in North Texas looking for work. So who's addressing the issue of spouses? Because we're a two-income household.
Well, that's a question General Casey also bring up, and I hate to put you guys on the spot, but AT&T and 7-Eleven and maybe you as well, Ruth, you can address.
Well, part of Operation Welcome Homes includes the military support for the family, and there's funding to assist the spouses in the transition. We know that spouses and families serve with the veteran and the active member and make the same sacrifices and have a lot of transition issues themselves as they have to move. And so there is a component of funding with respect to that as well, so that if you will find your local workforce solutions near you in Texas or go to texasworkforce.org, we can point you in that right direction. And veterans and their spouses have priority hiring. So you go to the front of the line for services and for anything that we can do to assist you, whether it's education, career, entrepreneurship, career, technical, any of the areas that you may be interested in. We have those resources here to provide in Texas, and we're very cognizant of the importance of it, including the spouses.
Jason, as a recruit.
I was going to say, the common theme that I've heard on the other panel, we're a community, first and foremost. And so from an AT&T perspective, of course, we'd love to selfishly hire as many family members, veterans, you name it. But one of the things we do is, look, we partner. This is not, AT&T solely doesn't have the answer, but through our partnerships, I don't have the specific numbers, but we have enabled through our partnerships when we say, hey, you may not be the right fit for AT&T, and we share that with our partners and make sure that not only those family members, those active military and as well as the veterans, are getting opportunities. So my answer is, it's a partnership. That's one of the things I'm really proud about is, if you go to AT&T.jobs/military, anyone in this room, anyone in the nation can get onto one of our, and we can help. We can talk. We can talk about your skill sets relative to AT&T, and we can say, hey, have you partnered with the Texas Workforce Commission? Have you partnered here? So my answer is, it's not one sole entity or organization that's going to make the difference. It's the collective community.
It's the collective. All right, let's take the next question, please.
Yeah. Terry Sievert, thanks to the panel and to all the veterans, and specifically General Casey for his leadership on this very important topic. So my question is, and it's addressing that fit, have there been any programs that have explored like a job shadowing period, 3 or 4 weeks, where employers could bring in veterans to let them see what a functioning HR, functioning engineer, functioning accountant looks like? And that allows the employer to see if there's a cultural fit to their company, but also lets them understand, hey, I thought I wanted to be an accountant, but really that's not what excites me. I actually think I want to go into HR, and it could address that fit. Are there any programs like that that have been considered?
Well, you know, it starts with policy first, because those last 12 months, and I think somebody from the other panel brought it up, you know, a corporal and a colonel in the same, reintegration class together is probably not the best thing in the world. But the Department of Defense has developed an externship program. Forgive me for forgetting the acronym. I have to write things on my hand, by the way. My kids make fun of me. That's my disability, by the way. Don't laugh. But that externship opportunity does exist from a policy perspective. From 180 days out, each of the respective services can ultimately have a service member apply to participate in a work-study program and still be paid active duty pay. The challenge is what we're doing right now in the SHRM Foundation and SHRM is we're trying to build those relationships with employers. Now, we've already done it in human resources, but that's only one of many occupational fields. So we've got work to do to educate employers. And by the way, guess who pays their salary during that time? The active duty pays their salary. So they have an opportunity to get that experience, to see if that's the right fit for them, and to ultimately benefit from that, come back, finish up their TAP program or Army career program or whatever it may be, and then move on to that what's next.
It's a really great idea.
I wanted to add one thing.
Thank you, Soldier for Life. My apologies.
The other advantage, one of the things AT&T has done to address it once you're talking to us or communicating with it, is we don't say, hey, here's the one career path you have. This is it. We don't talk to you about the job. We talk to you about a career, and AT&T allows you to have multiple careers within the walls of our organization. One of the programs we do is we go out and recruit for leaders, and we put them into what we call LDP program, Leadership Development Program, where that allows you to do 3 years in a job, different jobs every year. So do a rotation, and at the end, you tell us where you fit. So part of that attraction is, hey, if you don't know what you want, but you have the leadership skills we're looking for, come into the LDP program, and in 3 years, you can bounce around from marketing to sales to this, and then, hey, where does that fit make sense?
Yeah, can I also respond as well? We do some level of job preview to make sure it's a good fit on the front end. But beyond that, our training program is pretty extensive now. So when folks come into our company, the typical entry point is a field consultant, and this is a liaison to anywhere from 8 to 10 franchise owners. Before we actually light them up and they go live with a subgroup of stores, they'll spend up to 14 months, sometimes a little longer, really learning the job, really becoming experts at the job. In fact, I didn't spend that much time between commissioning and my first assignment. So we really lean into ensuring folks are prepared before they go out there. And there was a previous question about spouses, and I will tell you, on our franchising side, we have franchised to many veterans, and their spouses are also owners. They are co-owners of record. They manage those businesses together. and they've had a lot of success doing that.
Larry, thank you so much. Okay, last question, please.
First of all, I want to thank Working Nation and Hiring America for hosting this forum. My name is Ikenemobo, and I work for an organization called Metro Care Services. We're the leading provider of mental health and intellectual development assistance here in Dallas County. But we're also in the veteran service business. And one of the themes that I've heard a lot today is about how we have the resources for veterans and we have the veterans, but how to connect them. And this is not an advertisement for IBMF and Syracuse University, but we are partnering with them to bring a database to this community called Texas Serves North Texas, which will be an electronic database that will connect VSOs with each other for referrals and give results. So like right now, when we're doing referrals, you get your Rolodex or your whatever and your email, and you don't really know whatever happened with that. This will allow outcomes to be a part of that. Mr. Cleland started the first one when he was previously with IBMF in New York City. It's got a national database from Washington State to Rhode Island. So we're going to have that in our community as of November. It will be available to people. What we need as a community is to embrace that technology and use it. Instead of having 15 different technology platforms, we need to choose one, and not have paralysis by analysis and not be a part of it. And so what do you on the panel think about how we can get the community to embrace one platform and really get that going?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Many of SHRM's members are part of small businesses, 300 people or less. They don't have the capacity to do all the accommodation and support, whether it's behavioral health or otherwise. And it's our responsibility to partner them with organizations like yours to serve the needs of our veterans as they're in the private sector. And I would tell you that I think one of the things that we have to continue to do, SHRM, through our local chapters, and by the way, many of them are represented throughout even the audience here today, what we have to do is we have to continue to educate our employers of what those resources are, because they're not going to be able to fulfill all the needs of the veteran in-house. They're going to, because they may not have an ERG even, they may not be big enough. Yeah. So I couldn't agree with you more. It's a big challenge of education, because sometimes a lot of our members will come up to me and say, I just need to know where to go to find veterans. What's the right source? Or I need to find resources. They're well-meaning, they want to do it. We just have to help them connect the dots.
Andrew, thank you. And thank you so much for that question. Oh, did you want to add one?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's really good. There's tons of services that are available for veterans. We all know that. There are a lot of organizations that are trying to do well by veterans, but sometimes it's on the veteran side. It takes us a while to ask for help. It takes us a while to come to the realization that there's a need, or that we need to do something about it, or where do we reach, where do we look? So I think that non-for-profits, organizations, companies, and even individuals that are still within the military should really push this sort of mentality or mindset that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to reach out to a non-for-profit, it's okay to reach out to an organization, because the word will get out there. Yeah. I recently experienced a women's veteran retreat, and I learned about services that I didn't know about, and I've been out of the Army almost 10 years.
You almost wish there was just one repository that everyone, and I think that's what you're sort of getting at, that every veteran could turn to and know this is the place to go so that I can get these answers. Thank you so much for your question, and we are unfortunately out of time. So if you have questions for the panelists afterwards, certainly they're going to be milling around and you can approach them and ask them, but I wanted to thank you all for offering solutions and surfacing some of the challenges, because I think that's where the conversation needs to go next. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you can learn more about Hiring America at their website. You can also be part of this important conversation and stay connected to Working Nation on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our website, www.workingnation.com. Again, thank you to both our panelists for this important conversation, and thank you to all our veterans as well on our panels and in our audience. We thank you for your service.